Good afternoon. On behalf of the staff that is here from the Kings River Water Quality Coalition, Jarrett Winther, Jose Soto, and myself, I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's workshop. My name is Eric Athorpe. I'm the program manager for the Water Quality Coalition. I handle the technical reporting to the regional board and assorted other duties. First off, let's go over the packets that you have received. First one is a copy of today's slides. We'll have everything that we discuss here today. The second packet is it's got crop water use, 10-year average for a number of crops. We'll refer to this in a little while. It's also got information on the nitrogen summary report card, which is available on your account via the website, and some other information regarding nitrogen usage. And the last one is a nitrogen applied analysis for all the crops reported to the coalition. So this is, everybody's data summarized in as nitrogen applied. It's got some value for reference, but it's kind of, it also has some drawbacks from a regulatory standpoint. So today's agenda, we're going to begin with a review of the changes to the general orders that the state and regional boards have implemented over the course of the last couple of years. Jose will come up and discuss reporting requirements, due dates, some data issues that we have run into, and other items. Then I will come back and discuss the new templates that will take place or be enforced for the 2020 crop year, the coalition's efforts regarding groundwater quality and protection, and a general discussion of Kerman specific nitrogen use data that we have obtained. So first off, changes to the general order. The Regional Water Quality Control Board opted to write a general set of regulations covering irrigated agriculture, and the first coalition to fall under this new program was the East San Joaquin. Shortly after its adoption by the Regional Water Quality Control Board, it was challenged by the environmental community as being not strict enough on irrigated ag. The other coalitions joined this petition to the state board, saying that the regulations that were being proposed had gone too far. What that did is it gave us a place at the table when discussing the matter before the state board. Now, state board staff looked over the regulations, decided that there were some elements in it that they wanted. There were some things that they wanted consistent throughout the state, so they rewrote the East San Joaquin order and included a number of additional requirements, requirements that were required to be implemented in any general order covering irrigated ag. The first of these, one is relatively minor, is that they have eliminated, for the most part, the distinction between low and high vulnerability parcels. It means that all farmers are on equal footing as far as reporting goes. This means that all farmers, regardless of land vulnerability, are required to participate in some manner in an outreach event, be it a physical appearance such as this one, or viewing the recording that we are making online. The nitrogen summary reports were modified to include data off the farm evaluation surveys, and therefore rewritten to be more expansive as to the data collected. The nitrogen summary management plans are now called the Irrigation and Nitrogen Management Plan. They will cover the 2020 crop year with reporting beginning in 2021. Everybody will fill out all of the templates for the 2020 crop year, report it in 2021. As a trade-off to this increased requirement under the templates, the farm evaluation reporting has been reduced once every 5 years. So once you report the 2020 data in 2021, you won't have to do it again until the 2025 crop year, which reports in 2026. Now for the big one. We fought this. The environmental community wanted it badly. So did certain members of the state board and their staff. Drinking water supply testing. Any well that is used for drinking water purposes, be it straight drinking water or cooking, on a member-enrolled parcel must be tested. If you have a house on an adjacent parcel that is not associated with your coalition membership, that well is not subject to the regulation. If you have a well that feeds a drinking fountain in a shop or other facility, that would be, assuming that the shop is on an enrolled parcel. You'll be testing for nitrate and nitrite. It's a relatively simple chemical test done at the lab. That part of what they will charge you is relatively inexpensive. Most of the charge is the preparation of that data in a format that is acceptable to the state GeoTracker database. Therein lies the high cost of taking a sample to the lab. And that cost is built into what a certified lab will charge you. Yes, sir.
Can the grower take the sample to the lab?
Yes. You can go to the lab, get a clean bottle. They will instruct you on the handling of that bottle and the preferred method of testing. Basically, you would run a little bit of water through the system, collect a sample, put it on blue ice, and get it back to the lab probably the same day that you collect it. So it's kept chilled and yes.
Does the lab submit the paperwork to the state, or is the grower required to?
The lab submits the lab does the upload of the data to the state, and they will get you a copy of the results once they are done. But the time involved is the critical issue. It takes a little bit of time for the data to go from one instrument to another and then get formatted correctly into the state database. Now there is some information that you will need to provide the lab, the location of the well, and some other questions, but that should be relatively straightforward. Frequency of testing. Highly dependent upon what your results are. If you test between 0 and 8 parts per million nitrate, you will test continuously for 3 years, once per year, and then once every 5 years after that. You test between 8 and 10 parts per million. You will test every year. If your well comes back greater than 10 parts per million nitrate in, no further testing is required, but the well can no longer be used as a source of drinking water. No. It's solely nitrate and nitrite. Yes, sir.
What if you have a well on your property for the house? However, you're not drinking the water, you're not cooking with it, it's just mainly bathing in water.
You'll need to inform the, are you using a treatment system to, you're just flat not drinking the water? Okay, then provide documentation to the regional board that you are not using it as a drinking water source, and you should be fine. So, any end users other than yourself, be it somebody who's renting the property or if it's a drinking fountain or such, needs to be notified that the water no longer meets the EPA standard at 10 parts per million. Replacement water may be necessary. You may have to, if the levels are Within a certain range, a reverse osmosis system installed under the sink would be sufficient to provide a drinking water source. There is no restriction on using the water for bathing, washing clothes, any of that thing. It just cannot be used for drinking water. Supply wells need to be sampled before the end of 2020. Because of the time lag at the lab, I would recommend that you do the sampling early. I'd hate to see results not get reported because everybody showed up in December. The lab can process the samples quickly enough. It's the formatting to get it into the state database, and everybody else in the state will be doing the same thing. So the sooner the better. Yes, sir.
Is there a list of approved labs to do this?
There is a list of approved labs. You should have received something from the Regional Water Quality Control Board in October regarding this program, but there is a website on a slide further down that has the information, all the requirements and the local labs. Yes, sir.
If the drinking well is on a separate APN, not enrolled in this, then
If it is not on an enrolled parcel, it is not subject to the regulation. There's another question. Yes, sir.
Regarding the sampling, what's the process after you take the sample and get the result? Does the state, does the certified lab, do they send the information to Sacramento?
Yes, they do. The state will,
An
yeah,
address on each sample so they know where the well is? Is that
they'll have the,
how do
they have the
identify where the well
GPS
is?
coordinates.
Pardon?
They use GPS coordinates. So if you've got you got an app on your phone, like Compass or something like that on most phones, you hold it directly over the well and write down what the coordinates say. It's fairly straightforward. If not, you can supply APN number and a better description. You know, do the best you can as far as the location. You get it in the general neighborhood of where the well is located. Yes, sir.
So if my drinking well is on a parcel, I test it, it's greater than 10 parts per million, I can't make the choice whether to drink the water or not, it's not consumable.
All right, if you are the end user, you can continue using the water at your discretion. Quite frankly, the water is still safe to drink. The threshold is set really low. But from a liability standpoint, if you're renting or leasing the property out to somebody else, you know, it's probably better off that it's not used. But if you are the end user, you and your family, you make that choice for yourself. Yes, sir.
Is this a test for the actual water, or if one has a filtering system or treatment system, can that water go through that filter system?
If you've got a treatment system, I would recommend sending a sample on either side of that system, supply and then post-treatment. That'll give you an idea how good your system is working as well. Anything else? All right, like I said, we recommend early testing, and this requirement falls directly on the growers. It is not a coalition function. All right, Jose?
All right, my name's Jose, and I'll be going over the reporting requirements. Just like in the previous years, the due date for your form for the nitrogen summary report and the farm evaluations are still March 1st. And what you will be reporting on is the 2019 crop year, so what you did last year. And so this would apply to parcels that fall under the high vulnerability designation. For us, we prefer for you to do the online reporting. We'll always accept the paper copies, but the online reporting, that gives you the advantage of being able to make updates, because most of you guys have already submitted your farm evaluations in previous years, so that just gets updated from year to year. And if you Don't have any changes. It's really easy to renew. Since you're just putting your name and signing that it's been submitted. But if you have had changes to your to your irrigation methods, to your crop types, or some of the bigger things, you can make those edits on there and just submit it that way.
Change the farm name.
Farm name, that wouldn't, that, you can still do that online as well. You can change your, make those updates. What was that?
You just change it on the template?
You would change it right when you log in, on the login page for, under the contact information, you would change the farm name there. Okay. So the other thing that is coming up, which Eric will go over, is the completion of the irrigation nitrogen management plan. That's a new template that we're going to be using for the 2020 crop year, and that'll be something that will be submitted next year in 2021. If you do have self-certification from previous years, you can still sign off on those plans as well. For the online method, you would go to our website, which is kingsriverwqc.org. The link is up here where it says account. You use your member ID as a login name, and you put in your password. If by chance you don't have a password, or if you don't remember it, or you lost it, give us a call. We can assign a temporary password, which will allow you to log in, and you will be able to change it to a different password that you can have. We also do have a walk-in process if you would like. We're in our office. We're over by Jensen and Chestnut Avenue. But we do ask you, if you can, please schedule an appointment in advance. We're there from 8 to 5. We always have somebody who can help you out in person, no matter what. And one of the other things that you can do if you go online is you can see your partial status, payment statuses. As a lady asked earlier, you can also change your contact information, name, address, company name. You can do all that on the online method. So sometimes we run into common reporting issues, particularly on the nitrogen summary report. We run into the issue of missing crops, missing crop year. Crop year applies more to folks who have received a letter from the Regional Water Quality Control Board saying that they did not submit the previous year's reports. If you do happen to have that, make sure you write the crop year that you're reporting on. Oh, sorry, yes.
On this one page here, it says due date. It says due to the coalition by March 1, 2020. And it says nitrogen summary reports, old template. And right down there, it says grower by March 1, 2020. Completion of irrigation and nitrogen management template, new template.
Correct. Oh, right. So the forms that you're submitting to us, the coalition, is the old template. The one that it looks like it's a graph in multiple columns. That's the one you're submitting to us. The irrigation and nitrogen management plans. That's kind of combination of it's kind of a combination of the farm evaluation and the nitrogen management plan. That's a new template that Eric will go over here in the next in a couple slides. That's one you would complete, and that would be the one that stays on farm with you. And so to kind of distinguish those, we got a couple slides coming down that'll show the difference between the. Yes, correct. Any questions on that, or did I clarify that, or do you want me to try a little bit different approach? Not? Okay. Okay, so on here, like I said, the common reporting issues we run into is just missing information. Primarily not having a name, APNs, those are the things that make it a little bit more difficult for us to kind of track and connect that information that you may have submitted. Because then if we have an APN or a name, we can call, we'll find a way to get in contact with the grower and then try to clarify things from there. Production units is also something that comes up from time to time, in that depending on what you're growing, you may measure that production differently. If it's something like raisins, you're going to measure it in tons. If it's cotton, it's going to be in bales. And so what that does is, if you use a different production unit, it may throw things off and make it look like you're an outlier, like you're overusing fertilizer, or your production isn't quite what it may be on average with the other folks. And that kind of goes into the next part, which is reporting the gross yield rather than the yield per acre. For us, we always say everything at a rate, which is going to be on a per acre rate, the pounds of nitrogen per acre, the production units per acre. Those are the way we figure out our statistics. And so sometimes people, for both the yield and for the applied nitrogen, they end up putting the total amount of fertilizer put out in the field. So it may show up like, what's 1,000 pounds of nitrogen, or maybe sometimes we get numbers such as 20,000 pounds of nitrogen, but that's the total weight of the fertilizer, not the nitrogen content. So then we have to do a little bit of math, but in those cases, we normally would call the grower and kind of get that clarified with them. So that's where having APNs or the member ID number becomes critical, and for us to be able to make that connection. Often the other thing that kind of comes up as well is on the bottom part is the incorrect calculations of the A to Y ratio. The A to Y ratio is the amount of nitrogen applied divided by the yield per acre, and that gives us an idea of how much does it take for you to produce 1 ton of raisins, 1 bale of cotton, 1,000 pounds of almonds. That's the item we use for our statistical evaluation. On the farm evaluation survey, similar to the nitrogen summary report, we run into issues of, again, member IDs or name on pages. Like I said, for us, it's critical for us to be able to connect with the grower in case we have any questions, so that you don't end up getting a letter a couple months down the road saying that you didn't submit the report. And kind of crop types, you want to keep those up to date if you can. And then the other thing would be checking with your consultant, if CCA, PCA, if you're using a consultant service, on who's submitting what. Often some services will submit the nitrogen summary report, but the farm evaluation is something that they expect the landowner to submit. So you just want to talk to them to see who's submitting what, so that, again, both of the things get submitted by March 1st. On the farm evaluation, we run into issues with the wells. There's a little bit of confusion over what's an active well, inactive, or destroyed well. An active well is a well that you could potentially use for irrigating your field. So if you're on surface water, but you just from time to time use a well, that would be considered an active well. An inactive well would be one where maybe the water levels have dropped a little bit and it's just not producing as much as it did in the past. So you're, you still have it there, it has power, but it's just not being currently used. When we run into a little bit more is when we get to abandoned, destroyed wells. Abandoned wells would be those wells that are not going to be used just because the water level may have dropped, or the casing may have caved in or something. The regional board is going to ask you to destroy that well. You would have to hire a professional where they're going to come in, cut off the first 5 feet of casing, and then fill it up, and so that it can't have anything travel directly through that casing anymore. Because the concern for the regional board's side is that it's a direct connection from the surface to the groundwater, so they want to avoid that. Questions on anything I've reviewed so far? Payments. So sometimes we run into the issue of having multiple payments for one account, so you want to make sure you note that the ID number so we can get those cleared. Same thing with unsigned checks, incomplete checks. We use Chase Banking, and they're really strict on what they want on the checks, in terms of they have to have the lettering has to match the numbers on the check. So otherwise they won't let us deposit them, and then again, that just kind of delays things a little bit from there. But again, if you ever have any doubts, go ahead and give us a call, and we will see what we can do to clarify that with you. If by chance you've made an overpayment, we should get those sent out to you a little bit after the March 1st deadline. But if you have done an online payment with a credit card and you have an issue, go ahead and give us a call. We can turn those around in just a couple minutes. We can get those addressed. Any questions on what I went over? Nope. If not, I'll turn it back to Eric.
All right, as mentioned earlier, there are changes to the templates that you've been asked to fill out in previous years. This slide shows the current template, and at this point in time, you should be filling out the actual data for the 2019 crop year in preparation for transfer to the nitrogen summary report, which comes back to the coalition. If you are doing this via computer, the coalition website does have an Excel workbook that will take the formatted information from here and generate the the summary report for you to send in. It'll do all the math for you. The changes to the new template are significant enough that we haven't worked out whether we can actually duplicate that again for the new templates as opposed to the old ones. So, but we'll give that a shot this summer. So for the farm evaluation, the irrigation efficiency, irrigation practice, and nitrogen efficiency questions have been removed and transferred over to the nitrogen management plan template. The one new question on section 1 is APN and number of drinking water wells on that parcel. So that's relatively straightforward. And then section 2, which was part B, separates active and inactive wells at the top of the page and abandoned, destroyed wells at the bottom. Again, this is completed by everybody for the 2020 crop year, and then done again 5 years later. So with the migration of the questions regarding irrigation and nitrogen efficiency to the nitrogen management plan, that data will now be reported on a yearly basis. Again, the reporting requirement for these questions is reduced to once every 5 years and begins in 2020. So the new template is fairly similar to the existing one with the addition of new questions. Again, complete this template as you have in the past. All fields with the same crop and same primary irrigation practices can be listed on one page. So if you manage multiple fields of almonds and they're all managed the same way, they can all go on one page. You don't have to fill out a separate page for every field. The maximum acreage in any one field is 640. That may or may not apply out this far. It does have an issue. It does come up down the Tulare Lake bed because there are some parcels down there that are greater than 640 acres, but that is the limit the state board has put on. The irrigation method, efficiency practices, and nitrogen efficiency practices are located in the highlighted areas on this form. Another new set of questions is consideration of planned water use for the coming year. Now this is where the crop water use table that was provided to you will come in. These are 10-year averages for these crops based on the ag line system used by Kings River Conservation District. A 10-year average will take out a lot of the seasonal variability so that these numbers are a good place to start for estimating crop water use for the coming year. It also asks you to consider what you think you're going to do for irrigation. How much extra or under are you planning for the coming year? Crop water use can be found on a weekly basis at the Kings River Conservation District site ag line. This will give you crop water use for the previous 7 days, a prediction for the next 7, and season to date. This is more an irrigation scheduling tool. It'll allow you to kind of get a feel for how much water I'm going to need to apply for, in the coming week, and maybe you can tailor your nitrogen applications to be as efficient as possible if you know that you're going to have to put on only so much water in order to satisfy crop need. The whole idea here is to keep the nitrogen applied within the root zone and not let it leak out the bottom, which is what created this whole mess in the first place. Another new component on the worksheet is a consideration of nitrogen concentration in your irrigation water. Now, if you are using pumped groundwater, you can use a simple test kit like this one, which I picked up off the clearance rack at Walmart for $5 last December. You should be able to find a similar kit somewhere where they keep the pool chemicals. This test is valid for your irrigation well. It is not valid for your drinking water well. You still have to, the drinking water wells have to go through the lab. This will have, has test strips in it. You dip it into a sample of your water, compare it to a color chart, and it'll get you in the ballpark as to what your nitrogen is, and you only have to do this once every few years. Once every 3 to 5 years should be sufficient. Groundwater quality does not change that fast. So knowing what your anticipated crop evapotranspiration is for the coming year and the concentration of the nitrogen in your irrigation water, you can then calculate the nitrogen applied via the pumped groundwater in pounds of N per acre, and there's a calculator for that. This is another website that is available. It's agmpep.com. It was prepared by a consultant hired by the coalition to handle certain technical aspects of the general order requirements. And under the resources tab, there'll be a nitrogen calculator, which if you click on that and scroll to the bottom of the page, you'll get this calculator. Now I've ran some numbers through it. I assumed 10 part per million nitrate N content in the irrigation water. That repeats over in this box here. I put on 1 acre foot of water over on 1 acre, so 12 inches of water applied, all of it well water. That translated to 27.2 pounds of N per acre, just in irrigating with 10 part per million water. This box here will allow you to balance your irrigation supply if you are using a combination of surface and groundwater in whatever ratio. I figure, you know, if it's 75% surface water, then, and if it's straight out of the Kings River, the nitrate content of that water will be 0. The last 25% of the water that you have applied will be at whatever the concentration is, entered up here, and it will return the appropriate value there. So basically what this will allow you to do is, if you know what your crop water use is for the year, say early almonds at 41 inches, 41 inches of water translates to 3.5 acre feet. And depending on whatever the concentration is, that adds up to how much nitrogen you applied simply from using your well. So you need to know what your well is producing and a rough estimate of what your crop water use is, because that is the limiting factor. You can put 5 acre feet of water on, but the crop's only going to use 3.5. You figure the 3.5 is what your nitrogen application rate is.
Can you walk us through this? Where did the 27 come from?
All right. Walking through this once again, I entered a value of 10 parts per million in this box here. It repeated down here. I told it how much water I applied over what area. So it's essentially 12 inches of water, and then it ran through the formula and gave it 27.2. There should be if you want to, if you look at the last page of the handout that's got the crop water use, there's a page called Common Nitrogen Conversions. Table 4 on that page has got some simple conversions of nitrate and irrigation water to pounds per acre foot. And the formula used for those is right below it. Okay?
You need to tell us that.
All right, so for those plans that are completed for high vulnerable parcels, the certification would be, certifier would need to initial at the bottom. As Jose stated, that if you are currently allowed to self-certify, that self-certification is valid on the new template. If you want to learn how to self-certify your nitrogen plans, there is a class being offered February 6th in Parlier. Contact our office and we will get you a slot. That cost is $30?
Said
30, yeah. And that's, it's 4 hours. You sit through a lecture, you take a 30-question exam, get 21 of those questions right, you can self-certify your own plan for the next 3 years. And if you, there's also a continuing education requirement. We offer classes for that as well, and you need 3 hours of credit every 3 years. And we generally offer one class, multiple classes a year, but it's 3 hours per class. So you only have to attend one of those every 3 years. So for the Irrigation and Nitrogen Management Plan Summary Report, there's been some changes here as well. Additional detail as requested by the State Board. You start with the basic information, a member ID, who completed the form, what crop year it is, and the date you submitted. It'll ask you if you have been identified by the coalition as being a statistical outlier, meaning that your applied nitrogen divided by your yield is outside of an expected range. That can occur for a number of reasons. If you had all your nitrogen down for the year and your crop got wiped out in a hailstorm or some other freak accident, then that could throw these numbers off because you didn't have the yield that you were expecting. Such situations occur, we can you make note of that and get you off the hook as far as the Regional Water Quality Control Board is concerned. They're only going to become concerned if you are an outlier for 3 consecutive years. Additional data that you will need to report to us is a breakdown of nitrogen applied by category, all in pounds of N per acre. So you're going to have the N in your irrigation water. Again, you can use that calculator. That'll tell you what that value is. The pounds of N in any organic amendments that you put down, dry and liquid fertilizers, and any foliar fertilizers. So we need to have that broken down by category. And then you will also report your harvested yield in whatever units per acre. Now, for those of you who may be concerned about privacy issues, the database will assign each grower a random identifier that will belong to that grower, and the parcels will also be assigned a random identifier that will permanently mark that parcel. When we turn in our data to the board, it will not have grower name or address associated with it. It'll have these unique identifiers so that we can track this grower identifier over time, or we can track this parcel over time. However they want to run the analysis, but your name will not be associated with the data. You'll also be asked to complete this page, which is primary and secondary irrigation practices, what you have done to improve your irrigation efficiency, and what you do to maximize the nitrogen efficiency on your farm. Any questions about the new templates before I move on? All right, so the next section covers what the coalition is doing regarding groundwater quality monitoring. There are two programs in place. First off is the drinking water program we discussed earlier that you report or perform on for yourself, and the labs report the data back to the state. The other is the trend monitoring program that the coalition does once per year over a selected well network. It is still recommended that everybody tests their irrigation wells for nitrogen content, especially if you are in a high vulnerability area. So the trend monitoring program takes place mid-June or shortly thereafter over a selected network of shallow ag, domestic, and public supply wells spread from one end of the Kings Basin to the other. The test results for cooperating growers are available. We've recently mailed those out to those who have been participating in the past. For a well to be included within this program, it must have well construction data. We need to know how deep the well was drilled and where the screen intervals are, so we know from what part of the aquifer the water is coming from. The idea of this program is to monitor water quality at the uppermost portions of the aquifer, so we need screen intervals as close to the standing water depth as possible. So a 500-foot well that's screened at the bottom is not going to help me. A 500-foot well that's screened 150 feet down, and if the water table is at 140, that does help me. The purpose of the program is to monitor and characterize the water quality within the basin over a long-term period. And there are still some gaps in our desired network. Now, we are in the process of refining our strategy for doing this program, in which case we are going to be far more strategic about our well locations, and the well network that we have here may no longer be necessary. We may not need to sample all 90 of these wells. These dots, you can barely make them out, I'm sorry about that, indicate where the wells are located throughout the basin. And these highlighted areas under our existing program indicate where we have some gaps in our coverage. Well, like I said, we are trying to be more strategic about where our wells are located given specific criteria, and we may end up adding wells in some areas and deleting wells in others, and try and make it more efficient and more useful to the water board as to conditions within the basin. For those of you who have been to one of these events before, the next few slides will be familiar. Wellhead protection is a key component of our comprehensive groundwater management plan. And this slide indicates an ideal situation for a well. You've got a vacuum breaker located at the high point of the system, so that when the pump shuts off, the retreating water going back into the well will be chased by the air introduced here, and water in this part of the pipe will flow back toward the field. You've got a sounding access port at the base with a cap on it. The land, in general, slopes away from the well, and the injection points are far enough away from the well head itself that any water in this part of the pipe will push any material that is still in the pipe here toward the field and not back into the well. Physical barriers may be required if you are conducting chemigation or fertigation in your system, that being a check valve. In many cases, this is a label requirement of any material that you are applying. This is a physical barrier. This plate here will be open when the pump is in operation. As soon as the pump shuts off and the flow of water reverses, this arm will close this plate and seal off the discharge. And then the vacuum breaker will keep the pipe from collapsing due to the retreating water back into the well. For those of you still using surface irrigation systems, an air gap over your standpipe is highly recommended. You can inject any material that you see fit to irrigate your land into the standpipe. It will not get into the discharge of the pump and cause any problems in that regard. So this slide shows all the resources that were mentioned in today's presentation. You've got the Water Quality Coalition website for all your membership data and data submission to us. The Kings River Conservation District web page for the ag line system, allowing you to use the irrigation scheduling tools there. The agmpep.com website for the nitrogen calculator, nitrogen removed, and other information related to nitrogen and crops. And then the State Board website with all the information related to the drinking water program. Any questions before I move on to nitrogen feedback? All right, so nitrogen usage feedback is a required element of our outreach programs as defined in the general order. We are required to report back to you in general terms at these outreach meetings and data specifically to you via the website regarding nitrogen use and where your performance is in relation to others. So for the metric that is used for the regulatory purpose is an applied over removed. What we do is we calculate what your yields are based on the A over Y numbers that you supply to us, apply an appropriate coefficient as determined by UC Research and others, and determine how much nitrogen was actually removed by the crop when you harvested. From that, we can generate this ratio of applied over removed. Anything beyond a certain threshold would be classified as an outlier. Now, if you look at the nitrogen summary report card page on the handout with the crop water use, the graphic on that page will give you a field by field look. One of these will be prepared for each field. It'll show where that field is in comparison to everybody else. It's better in color. Your field will be a yellow circle amongst a sea of black ones. And as long as you are below or within that box defined on this graphic, you are fine. Or you can just look at the bottom of the page. You get a green check mark, you're fine. You get a red X, there's something you need to address. The reporting may or may not indicate whether you need to. Yes, sir.
That'll show up when we're doing our templates, or after we do it?
Yeah, when you first log in, it'll ask if you want to look at it. I would wait until July at least, so that everybody's data is into the system, and then a more accurate analysis will be available at that point. But like I said, it'll give you a feel for where you are in comparison with the same crop that everybody else is growing. Again, it may or may not indicate corrective action depending on circumstances. Consistently being identified as an outlier based on the statistical method we use will draw regulatory scrutiny. We've got it set up at the present time where we're kind of a firewall between you and the regulators. They prefer to work through us to deal with these issues, but that doesn't preclude their ability to go around us and go directly to you. For those parcels that are currently classified as low vulnerability, if you are consistently identified as an outlier, it may trigger additional requirements such as plan certification and additional outreach. So the next few slides are a very simple metric, not at all suitable for regulatory purposes because it does not account for yield. This is simply nitrogen applied based on the data supplied by the growers, and this is isolated for the area immediately around Kerman. So here you've got in 25-pound increments the amount of parcels that reported in each category for nitrogen applied in almonds. You can see from this graph that the majority of growers prefer a nitrogen applied rate of between 175 and 200 pounds an acre. And using our statistical methods, anybody in excess of 330 pounds of N would run the risk of being an outlier. We are not passing any judgment on where you fall on this graph. You are free to use whatever nitrogen rate you feel is appropriate for your production system. And these do not account for yield. So you can have a high nitrogen rate, but if you get a high yield to go with it, you'll be fine. It's those growers that apply a lot of nitrogen and have lousy yield that we're worried about. Yes, sir?
Is there any age of the crop that is considered?
Not yet.
How many of these are non-bearing?
Yeah, that is, well, non-bearing was eliminated from the analysis. When they turn in the data, there is a couple of boxes for no yield or non-bearing. So they are eliminated out of the analysis. But crop age is something that will come into play with the new templates. This graph for raisins indicates that most of the growers are comfortable around 50 to 75 pounds of N. And what this data kind of shows us is a commonality of thinking amongst the growers that, okay, this is about the right rate for this area for these crops. So you can kind of get a feel for how consistent everybody is by looking at this data. Now pistachios, because of the alternate bearing nature and varying ages of the crops, are all over the board. I'm thinking that these are relatively young trees that are just beginning to produce. You got some of the more mature ones here at the 150 to 175 level, and some of the more higher producing trees out here 275 to 300. Using our math for determining outliers, anything beyond 263 may constitute an outlier, but again, these metrics do not consider yield. So a high rate may not necessarily translate into a problem. Line grapes show a similar cluster of nitrogen application, most of it occurring between 25 and 100 pounds an acre. Table grapes are, again, similar in performance. Data points like this are more than likely errors in reporting from the grower. These little blips are annoying, and we do our best to quality control the data as it's coming in or shortly before we run our final analysis. A few of these remain. Cotton is one that, this could be varietal driven, it could be insect pressures, who knows. But anyway, you get the idea that most growers are in the 175 to 200 pound range, which is about right for a 3-bale crop. Some of the higher producing varieties may require applications upwards of 250 pounds per acre. Onions, being a high nitrogen crop, have got correspondingly higher nitrogen application rates. Most of the rates begin at the 175 mark and continue all the way out past 350. Again, this metric does not take into account what your actual yield was, so it's more for comparison, what you think you're doing versus what everybody else is doing. Tomatoes are much the same way. You've got application rates between 200 and 275. And anything in excess of 400 pounds would probably be an issue. Any questions?